Teams are willing to spend money on wide receivers. I mean, just a few years ago, we see Christian Kirk coming from nowhere, getting $72 million when that was a big deal in the NFL. You have Jacoby Myers this past offseason getting $33 million. We've seen Hunter Renfrow sign a $32 million deal. We know these wide receivers are going to get paid. I want to go through our top 10 guys and also some honorable mentions that maybe didn't make the top 10. Starting off with the honorable mentions, we're going to go with Chark. This isn't particularly a wide receiver that you should be super excited about from a fantasy football perspective, but he should most likely find a team this next year. I mean, in Carolina this past season, he goes out, he averages about 35 receiving yards per game. Horrible situation. I think Chark could maybe actually be interesting for underdog best ball tournaments, looking like super deep. If we're looking at the range of outcomes for what you had with DJ Chark in his age 27 season, going to age 28 since the year 2000, using the road of his screener, pretty much best case scenario is he turns into Kenny Britt, Khalif Raymond. I mean, that profile of guys. Obviously, there is that outside chance that he does just kind of wash out and turn into Corey Davis based off what we've seen historically. Now, going over to our next honorable mention, Noah Brown showed out, right? I mean, Noah Brown was in Dallas for essentially 5 years and did diddly squat through the 5 seasons, didn't even accumulate 1,000 total receiving yards. Whereas this year, I mean, he goes out and he averages about 52 receiving yards per game. I mean, Noah Brown was great in those games where you had CJ Stroud. Obviously, this is a team that had to lean on him whenever you had no Tank Dell. It sucks that Noah Brown did miss time himself. But nonetheless, this is a wide receiver that should most likely get paid and have, I mean, a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 role for an NFL team this next season. If you are looking at the range of outcomes, I would say pretty much best case scenario, though, is Noah Brown turns into a Tim Patrick level player, not someone that's going to make a difference for your dynasty team. Now, going over to Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne was pretty damn good at the beginning of the year, considering how bad New England was. I mean, over the past pretty much 3 seasons, he's been hovering around 40, 45 receiving yards per game. You can expand that out to the past 4 years. He will be 29 years old coming off torn ACL this next season, though, so it is difficult to get super excited about Bourne. Now, KJ Osborne is going to be our next guy, and with KJ Osborne, this is a wide receiver that for 3 straight years now in Minnesota, he's had a decent role. I would say pretty much best case scenario for Osborne as he goes back to the Minnesota Vikings, right? Does seem like a natural fit for him. If you're looking at the comps, I mean, yes, you have Brandon Cooks, who posted a similar age 26 season over in Los Angeles. You had Noah Brown in 2022. So maybe KJ Osborne is the next Noah Brown, the next Josh Reynolds, based off what we've seen historically. Now, cracking inside the top 10, I'm going to put a wide receiver that hasn't looked good in a few years. Obviously, he was coming off a significant injury this season, but we will go with Darnell Mooney. Now, if you are looking at Darnell Mooney, he's been stuck in Chicago, where over the past 4 years, you have seen the worst passing offense that the NFL has had in quite some time. If you look at the Chicago Bears over the past 3 seasons with Justin Fields, obviously Fields himself is great in fantasy given his rushing upside, but the passing volume has been historically bad. Not even just the worst in the NFL. I mean, it's been the worst in the NFL that we've seen in a long time. I mean, Darnell Mooney's been a consistent player. He's never been that great, obviously. This season was very gross. If you're looking at the historical comps, the best you have is Eddie Royal back in 2012, 2013. But at the same time, you can maybe say he finds a better situation than Chicago, and maybe going into his age 27 season, he's a little bit better now that he's another year removed from his torn ACL. Now let's go over and look at Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel is going to come in at 9. Samuel coming off a season where he did average about 38 receiving yards per game. Same exact thing that he did in Washington the year prior. Obviously, back in Carolina, Curtis Samuel did show that flash, especially as a hybrid player that will run the ball just a little bit. This is a wide receiver that I'd imagine gets paid based off his athleticism and based off his ability in multiple areas of the game. If you're looking at the comps that we have had historically, you're looking at his best case scenario being Mohamed Sanu, Taylor Gabriel. So we're not quite to the part of the list of the guys that are going to make a significant difference. Now, the main thing that I was surprised about with this video is I didn't realize how long Tyler Boyd's been in Cincinnati. Tyler Boyd will be a free agent this next year, pretty much the best case scenario here is you're looking at like a late career Cole Beasley, right? And I know that doesn't sound great, but I mean, you are looking at a wide receiver that can be a chain mover for an NFL team. You're looking at a wide receiver that can be decent from a dynasty perspective if you have a super deep starting lineup, or maybe if you're playing in a best ball league, obviously someone for the later rounds. But nonetheless, with Tyler Boyd coming off a season where he only averaged 39 receiving yards per game, this is the worst you've seen since 2017. But at the same time, you had no Joe Burrow, right? So it is somewhat understandable. I just don't necessarily know if there's a better situation outside of Cincinnati. And obviously, we'll talk about T. Higgins a little bit later on. Higgins may leave Cincy, so maybe they just keep Tyler Boyd on the cheap. Now, I don't know if we should have Michael Thomas lower than this because obviously Michael Thomas has not done anything since 2019. If you look at the historical comps, I mean, you have some guys that really flamed out here. You have about the best case scenario being about 60 receiving yards per game going into your age 31 season, coming off a season that Michael Thomas just had, averaging about 45 receiving yards per game. But nonetheless, I mean, if you are looking at Thomas, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is no longer a New Orleans Saint based off this team's cap situation. Now, going over to another guy that's had his best years behind him, we'll be looking at Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, I guess whatever team Odell goes to will be the team that wins the Super Bowl. But nonetheless, this is a wide receiver that this season does average about 40 receiving yards per game. If you look at the historical comps, you're not necessarily expecting Odell to come out here and be great next year at 32 years old. But I mean, Bobby Ingram at the same age coming off a similar season did average about 60 receiving yards per game. From what I've heard regarding Odell Beckham Jr., does sound like he wants to just go back to Baltimore, which you can understand. Now, the top 5 guys, these are going to be the guys that actually make a difference. These are going to be the guys that move the needle. Our first player, I'd say his best case scenario, as he stays in Buffalo, will be Gabe Davis. If you are looking at Gabe Davis, I understand that he's been quote-unquote disappointing based off where you fools drafted him 2 years ago. Yes, if you were drafting him in the 3rd round of underdog drafts, you are very disappointed with Gabe Davis, and he seems like a massive failure. If you look at the reality of the situation, Gabe Davis is a vertical field stretching wide receiver that is going to be very efficient with a limited number of targets. I mean, he has averaged 9.1 yards per target through his first 4 years of Buffalo. He is only 24 years old. This was someone that was drafted on day 3. Gabe Davis for the Buffalo Bills has been a massive success for the investment that they put into it. If you're looking at the historical comps, you have guys like Christian Kirk, Kenny Stills, Reggie Wayne, and Sammy Watkins at 24 years old putting up similar seasons. I would say my favorite comp is actually going to be Kenny Stills, right? It's a wide receiver that's actually pretty damn good from an NFL perspective that's going to stretch NFL defenses. From a fantasy perspective, obviously he's not going to command a ton of volume. You're excited about him in best ball because his big play potential. So if you are drafting on underdog, I would definitely look at Gabe Davis again if he lands in Buffalo. But if he does go outside of Buffalo, I mean, that's going to be the spot where you're significantly less excited. He is still incredibly young, though. And if you're not already drafting on underdog, I don't know what you're doing. Of course, you're going to be drafting there all offseason. If you want to draft with us, you can find that link in the description or the comment section. And also, if you join Underdog, you can actually get a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for this Sunday as well. Promo code FLOCK is going to get that Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, a 100% deposit match up to $200, plus our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. Find that link in the description and comment section. Now, going over to our next guy, yes, another player that was a big-time disappointment for you fools that were drafting him in their 2nd or 3rd rounds of underdog drafts this past year. But Calvin Ridley was fine. He cracked 1,000 receiving yards, right? I mean, he had 136 targets. It's actually funny that if the Jags sign Ridley, they're going to have to give up a higher pick than they would if they let Calvin Ridley go. So there is a decent shot that Calvin Ridley is not a Jacksonville Jaguar this next season. I mean, he will be 30 years old. This is a wide receiver that didn't stay that long at Alabama, but he stayed forever in college. So, I mean, his age is very deceiving. He played his rookie season at 24. If you are looking at the historical comps, I mean, Troy Brown way back in 2000 at 29 years old put a similar season. The following year, he had about 75 receiving yards per game. You also saw the fall off from Alshon Jeffrey at the same age, where Alshon Jeffrey going into his next year averaged only 16 receiving yards per game. So you have a wide range of outcomes here for Ridley. I think you could get a bounce back this next year. I think you could see the continued trail off. If you are looking for landing spots for Ridley, obviously there are great teams that need wide receivers, such as KC, maybe Buffalo, if you do have a departure of Gabe Davis. Now, going over to our next guy, I would argue that Ridley's the more talented wide receiver, but Hollywood Brown is the younger player. I also think Hollywood Brown's going to be someone that NFL teams go out of their way and target, particularly because his speed. We know that teams are going to prioritize speed, 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 and that is what's going to make a difference from an NFL perspective, where these guys such as Gabe Davis, such as Hollywood Brown, that can stretch NFL defenses, they are going to help their NFL teams more than they will help our fantasy teams, more than they will help our dynasty teams. Nonetheless, Hollywood Brown has had 4 straight seasons where he's commanded over 100 targets. The issue is he's been very inefficient, especially this past year. Obviously, it was a bad situation in Arizona, but Hollywood Brown was at 5.7 yards per target, which is laughably bad. So it comes down to, do you think that a better situation for Hollywood will allow him to be efficient yet again? Because we have seen the efficiency going back to his rookie season in Baltimore. He averaged 8.2 yards per target. Now, going over to our third guy, we will be looking at Mike Evans. With Mike Evans, I think you can make an argument from a talent perspective. Maybe he's higher than one of the 2 guys ahead of him, but he's going to be 31 years old this next season. You are seeing a career that has been 10 seasons with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a Hall of Fame level career, at least in my opinion. I mean, this is a wide receiver that has played 154 games, has had almost 1,200 receiving yards, has had 94 receiving touchdowns. If you're looking at the historical comps, you have guys that are able to continue to be elite going into their age 31 seasons. You have guys like Andre Johnson, Reggie Wayne, comping to Mike Evans. You have AJ Green completely falling off, which of course is a possibility. It's a possibility for any of these guys in their 30s. But nonetheless, Evans maintained his efficiency, 9.2 yards per target this past year. And Evans looks great. Now going over to our second best free agent, I think you make an argument that maybe he'd be number 1 if he was younger than T. Higgins, but he's not. We're going to go Michael Pittman Jr. Michael Pittman Jr. was our 2nd most drafted guy on Underdog this year. Love Michael Pittman Jr. This is a wide receiver that comes out. He has 72 receiving yards per game, 7.4 yards per target with a backup quarterback here in Gardner Minshew pretty much the entire season. Going into his age 27 year, he has a bunch of great comps you can look at. Allen Robinson, Brandon Marshall, Wes Welker, Larry Fitzgerald, Chris Godwin. I mean, pretty much the range of outcomes here is nailed in for Michael Pittman Jr. to not be that elite wide receiver 1 going into his age 27 year, but more so to be that low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. We have a great idea of who Pittman is at this point. I do think that you most likely have him back in Indy based off the rookie quarterback contract with Anthony Richardson. Now, a team that does not have a rookie quarterback contract anymore, a team that is about to have to start paying a Mr. Joe Burrow, a team that's going to soon have to start paying a Mr. Jamar Chase, will see T. Higgins as a free agent this offseason. There were a bunch of trade rumors regarding T. Higgins last year. So what's interesting is if you look at updated odds of where T. Higgins will be this next season, you have plus 125 for Cincinnati. So obviously Cincinnati is by far and away the favorite, but it's still less than 50%. If you're taking the field or Cincinnati, I'm probably taking the field. However, if you're taking Cincinnati or any other one particular team, obviously it's more likely it's Cincinnati. But other teams that are going to be in the mix, you have the Patriots, the Chiefs. I mean, if the Chiefs could somehow make the money work, obviously that'd be phenomenal. I think the Panthers would be a realistic spot if T. Higgins goes, you know what? I don't care about winning. Give me all the money in the world. I think that'd make a lot of sense. Houston could be a nice combination of the two. Houston with C.J. Stroud on a rookie deal could go out there and pay T. Higgins. I think they could be contenders. You have the Jets here, the Giants here, the Browns, and then obviously all the other teams in the NFL. But I think T. Higgins will be the number one wide receiver people are looking at, as this is a wide receiver that obviously dealt with injuries over the past 2 years, but he's 24 years old, about to be 25. Now, let's go over and let's look at some cut candidates, because there will be some players that I really want to watch You have obvious cut candidates like Hunter Renfrow that we mentioned earlier. I mean, Hunter Renfrow, you could save, about $8 million if the Raiders decided to move on from him, which is 100% a possibility. Now, two guys that I really want to be looking at. I think that there is an outside chance that either one of these players restructures. There's an outside chance that either one of them is let go of, and there's an outside chance that they hold on to both. But right now, Mike Williams is owed $32 million. Keenan Allen is owed $34 million. So let me get out the calculator here because I'm no mathematician. We're going to need this. Let's go $34 million plus $32 million. That is $66 million for a 30-year-old wide receiver coming off a torn ACL and a 32-year-old wide receiver that, yes, was great, but he's a 32-year-old wide receiver. So I don't know what they do with that $66 million. Maybe they try to restructure one of these deals. Maybe they move on from one of these guys, but they could save $20 million if they were to move on from Mike Williams, and they could save $23 million if they were to move on from Keenan Allen. I don't know. Maybe they keep them both. Obviously, I'm just some internet clown, so don't listen to me. Now, MVS will be our next guy. I mean, with MVS, only $2 million on the dead cap. They owe about $14 million, so you could save $12 million from moving on from him. He's going to be 30 years old, speedy wide receiver. Typically, these are going to be the guys that lose at first. MVS does not look like anything special. Courtland Sutton was a wide receiver that I think would have been really close to a guarantee cut if it wasn't for this past season, putting up one of the best years of his career. I mean, if they move on from him now, they're still going to have about $7.5 million on the dead cap. But over the next 2 seasons, they will get out of 34. So, I mean, if you look at the delta, they're going to save about $27 million if they decided to move on from Courtland Sutton, which is by no means a guarantee, but it will be something to look out for. And DeAndre Hopkins will be our last guy. With DeAndre, you could save about $10 million. He's going to be 32. This team may be in a full-blown rebuild. We just don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily think any of these wide receivers are guaranteed to get cut outside of maybe Hunter Renfrow, but I think that they will all be players that we do want to be watching. But I think that's all I got for you. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like, subscribe, and of course, if you wanted to check out that Christian McCaffrey special pick on more than less than half a total yard, if you want to get in drafts with us this offseason, do that on Underdog Fantasy. Links in the description, links in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings and that CMC special pick on more than less than half a total yard. But I think that's what I got for you. Really hope you enjoyed it, and really hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.